Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. It has been some time since I've written a blog and recorded a vodcast, and there's a reason for that. I didn't feel I had anything edifying to say to you. So I'm not going to apologize, but things have come to a head as they often do. So despite the length of time since my last recording and written blog, here we go. We're going to talk about the impossibility of collective salvation, which is why collectivism fails. It's man's attempt to save himself, and only God can save us from ourselves. When you're looking for an enemy, you need to understand that you are your own worst enemy. My worst enemy is talking to you. Are you noticing synchronicities more frequently? There is no such thing as coincidence. We are witnesses to emerging patterns of a liberal authoritarianism all throughout the Western world. Yet the words of these authoritarians deconstruct their own arguments that they make even as they demand that we deny the evidence of our own lying eyes and ears. These oligarchs are pathologically delusional and violently illiberal. They are committed to using every means at their disposal to force us to comply to their insane edicts, policies, and programs, while forcing us to ignore the utter failures and negative outcomes of every one of these policies. We are being governed by Marxo-fascists who promote a totalitarian global agenda rather than to serve the constituents who elected them. This is, if indeed they hold office as a result of a free and open electoral process, given the fact we now have every reason to doubt that, based on the biased and ridiculous testimony recently given by Canada's own Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the inquiry into such, and Brian Lilley's words from an article in the Toronto Sun entitled, "Justin Trudeau Wants Canada Kept in the Dark on Foreign Interference." Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has called for names of those involved to be released for more than a year. Here is the latest from 35,000 feet above the middle of the USA. Brian was flying back to Toronto, I assume. If Justin Trudeau had his way, Canadians would never know about foreign interference in this country, never mind the names of those involved. Trudeau made that abundantly clear in his highly partisan appearance at the Foreign Interference Commission on Wednesday. In his testimony, Trudeau lashed out at those who leaked information to the public and explained how this could all be handled without coming clean to the public. If you were hopeful that Trudeau would heed the call by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to release the names of all MPs that have collaborated with foreign interference, don't hold your breath. If it were up to Trudeau, there wouldn't even be a Foreign Interference Commission. There is no question that the criminal who leaked the information to the media had a role to play in our decision, Trudeau said of the government's expulsion of Zhao Wei. Now I'll quote from Oliver Cromwell. This following comes from his speech when he dismissed the Rump Parliament in London in April of 1653, and you should all consider it seriously. It is high time to put an end to you sitting in this place, which you have dishonored by your contempt of all virtue and defiled by your practice of every vice. Ye are a factious crew, and enemies to all good government. Ye are a pack of mercenary wretches. Is there a single virtue now remaining amongst you? Is there one vice you do not possess? Which of you have not bartered your conscience for bribes? Is there a man or woman amongst you that is the least care for the good of the Commonwealth? Thus said Oliver Cromwell to the Rump Parliament. Meanwhile, 4 of Trudeau's own cabinet ministers have stated that they will not run for re-election, even as their own leader craters the fortunes of the Liberal Party of Canada, and his caucus is in open rebellion, with many backbenchers signing a petition to have the Prime Minister resign before the LPC loses all its support. Lest we forget that famous warning given by Trudeau's former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who told Trudeau, "I wish I'd never met you." She revealed in her book that on the day Prime Minister Justin Trudeau formally removed Jody Wilson-Raybould as Justice Minister and Attorney General, she approached her successor at the cabinet swearing-in ceremony to deliver a cryptic warning. First, she congratulated David Lametti on his new role and offered her assistance in the transition. Then purposely, with Privy Council Clerk Michael Wernick standing within earshot, I offered Lametti a warning, she said. Be careful. All is not what it seems. Wilson-Raybould writes in her new book, Indian in the Cabinet, I looked directly at the clerk when I said it. Lametti replied, noted. Furthermore, the Premier of Alberta, Daniel Smith, has warned the nation that she fears Trudeau will become more dangerous before he is punted, just like a cornered animal. After all, even rats have teeth. Ethics scholar Judy Ponesse has produced lectures about the normalizing of corruption under the Trudeau regime. If ever there was a catchphrase which sums up Trudeau's reign of authoritarian overreach, that must be the most fitting. We need to remember that the principal weapon that radical social collectivists have in their arsenal of dirty tricks is to accuse their ideological opponents of the very things for which they themselves are guilty, which is why, at the inquiry, Trudeau blamed Poilievre for foreign interference, while Poilievre was screaming, release the names. Postmodernists are demanding that history be rewritten with the specific intent of ensuring that it be repeated. The information age, so-called smart technology, and the social sciences have coalesced in agreement, providing the ideal conditions for creating the perfect authoritarian social collectivist dystopia. Here are a few of the reasons as to why this has become an inevitability. Postmodern relativism is an attack on the literal meaning of words, as well as on the value of Western culture over the murderous medieval tribalism that our leaders are deliberately importing unvetted into our midst at the taxpayers' expense. But this is far from the only existential ideological challenge we are facing. Cultural Marxism has been merged with global financial fascism driven by the military-industrial complex and an international investment banking system that are now deep in bed with the CCP. They have used Big Pharma to sicken humanity in the name of vaccinating the planet against the very artificial virus that they were responsible for creating in the Level 4 laboratory in Wuhan in cooperation with the Communist Chinese military. Given these facts, I can guarantee that the next pandemic and species of political insanity that these authoritarian actors will unleash upon humanity will make COVID-19 look like a mere triviality, or perhaps more accurately, simply a dry run for what is to come next. Oligarchs, who are endowed with great power, are also possessed by pathological narcissism. This cabal, despite their unlikely ties to one another, are now manifesting satanic influence over humanity on a global scale. Demonic entities have coalesced into an all-controlling Marxo-fascist blob who are promoting endless, unwinnable proxy wars. Conflicts which can only be ended by restoring the grand narrative to the West, namely that Christ alone is King, and that collective salvation is a lie. Only individuals with free will are capable of choosing to accept salvation by recognizing their own need of repentance. Due to the West's rejection of the Christian message, God has permitted us to be reminded that social collectivism of all kinds, whether it is Nazism, fascism, socialism, communism, wokeism, political Islamism, postmodernism, and cultural Marxism, all lead to the rejection of individual accountability and personal sovereignty that replaces I with we. In a Christian society, every single member of Christ's body must have freely chosen personal knowledge of Him for themselves. One cannot be forced to convert, for there is no coercion with God. He has made us all sovereign and free to choose for ourselves. And now I'll read from Deuteronomy chapter 30 from the King James Version on restoration promised. Verse 1, and it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee. Verse 2, and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shalt obey his voice, according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart, and with all thy soul. Verse 3, then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity, and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. Verse 4, if any in thine be driven unto the uttermost part of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. 5, and the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it. And he will do thee good, and multiply thee above thy fathers. Verse 6, and the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart, and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. 7, and the Lord thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies, and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee. 8, and thou shalt return and obey the voice of the Lord, and do all his commandments which I command thee this day. 9, and the Lord thy God will make thee plenteous in every work of thine hand, in the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy cattle, and the fruit of thy land, for good. For the Lord will again rejoice over thee for good, as he rejoiced over thy fathers. 10, and if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which are written in this book of the law, and if thou turn unto the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thine soul. Here we are now set before us a choice of life and death. Verse 11, for this commandment which I command thee this day, it is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off. 12, it is not in heaven, that thou shouldest say, Who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it? 13. Neither is it beyond the sea, that thou shouldest say, Who shall go over the sea for us and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it? 14. But the word is very nigh unto thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, that thou mayest do it. 15. See, I have set before thee, this day, life and good, death and evil. These are our choices. God has set before us life and good, death and evil. 16. And that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that thou mayest live and multiply. And the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land which thou goest to possess it. But if thine heart turn away, and that so that thou wilt not hear, but shalt be drawn away and worship other gods and serve them. 18. I denounce you unto this day, that ye shall surely perish, and that ye shall not prolong your days upon the land, whither thou passest over Jordan to go to possess it. 19. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. 20. That thou mayest love the Lord thy God, and that thou mayest obey his voice, and that thou mayest cleave unto him. For he is thy life, and the length of thy days, that thou mayest dwell in the land which the Lord swore unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. My righteous ancestor came from Yorkshire to establish Methodist missions in what was then Upper Canada. I pray for his sake and for the sake of the remnant that God rid us of the unconscionable evil that Justin Trudeau represents, that his government represents. He is possessed by every species of godless ideological possession. These are things to think and pray about on this October the 18th. God bless you all. Please leave remarks and comments, criticisms, and share this. Challenge to your friends and family to talk about these things. No one is going to do it but us. No one's coming for your salvation. God is presented unto you death and life. Choose life.